The 1965 Delano Grape Strike, How Conflict Led to Compromise. World War II, a shortage of farmers in the United States arose. Migrant workers, brought in primarily from Mexico as well as some from the Philippines, were sent to fill the places of those who had gone to fight in the war. However unjust, they worked under horrible conditions. The United States and Mexican government's agreement, called the Bracero Program, promised workers decent living conditions and a reasonable wage. But this was not always followed by farm owners. It also kept migrant workers from striking, and later, after World War II ended, another program, Operation Wetback, was implemented to arrest and deport migrant workers back to Mexico. The movement towards fundamental rights for migrant workers was an ongoing issue that took place all over the United States. But the epicenter was in the town of Delano, California, a major center of grape agriculture. The story of what came to be known as the Delano Grape Strike, also referred to as La Huelga, spans from the start of the Bracero Program in 1954 through a strike by migrant workers and their eventual organization into a union and agreement in 1970. This gave migrant workers more rights, and grape company sales began to increase again. This is a compelling story of courage through conflict and eventual compromise. During World War II, a majority of farmers were sent to fight in the war, leaving the United States with few people to grow their food. The solution to this problem was to have migrant workers take their places. Although the workers were necessary, they were treated terribly. Some of the main issues were the low wages. Workers were only getting paid 90 cents per hour plus 10 cents per basket of grapes, while they wanted $1.40 per hour. The workers also lacked basic amenities in the field, such as bathrooms. Workers were also forced to pay for water and housing, which was an unheated metal shack without any toilets or cooking facilities. The migrant workers were forced to complete very hard labor. They were exposed to unsafe equipment and dangerous chemicals. All these factors contributed to the very short lifespan of 49 years. Many workers feared going on strike or protesting. One of the reasons for their fear was the Bracero Program, which kept workers from striking by threatening them, saying that if they protested or went on strike, they would quickly be fired and replaced. After World War II, Operation Wetback was established by U.S. Attorney General Herbert Brownell Jr. and by President Dwight D. Eisenhower. This campaign resulted in the deportation of many Mexicans. After World War II, the workers were assumed to not be needed any longer, and to add to that, the American public believed that the Mexicans were taking away jobs. These factors led to the harsh transportation of Mexicans back over the border. In America, 1850, the demand for seasonal labor increased. Farmers needed more workers, so the solution to the lack of farm workers was to use immigrants, which at the time were often European. Later in 1903, Japanese and Mexican workers went on strike for better wages and formed a labor association. The association united different cultural and ethnic groups under one common goal. These were some of the early examples of unions and worker-organized strikes. In the 20th century, urbanization, changes in farm production, and changes in technology yet again increased the need for laborers. Later in the century, the Public Health Service and government attempted to make farm workers' living conditions better. At the time, as little as only 20% of farm workers had necessities such as toilets and running water. Labor unions were formed to fight for the laborers' rights, but agricultural workers' rights remained untouched. In 1965, strikes by agricultural workers led to a slight increase in pay, but didn't lead to union recognition for them. Unions are necessary when it comes to making sure workers are treated fairly. Without a union, workers aren't protected and basic standards don't have to be set for them. Unions make sure wages, working conditions, and the workers' quality of life is up to standards. Without a union, the people are always cheated and they are so innocent. Cesar Chavez. Migrant workers desperately needed a labor union to represent them and fight for fair rights. That union was formed in the years to come. On September 8, 1965, the Delano Grape Strike began. It all started when Filipino workers refused to pick Coachella grapes. They worked with the Agricultural Worker Organizing Committee, or AWOC, to organize a strike. This strike went horribly wrong, and the grape company simply brought in Latinos to replace the striking Filipinos. Then AWOC turned to the National Farm Workers Association, or NFWA, for help. NFWA was founded by Cesar Chavez, a labor leader who organized the first successful union of farm workers in California. Pressure from the NFWA and other unions ended the Bracero Program in 1964. Ending the Bracero Program was one of the main goals of the Delano Grape Strike. Ending the program enabled migrant workers to negotiate better pay conditions. NFWA joined AWOC in the Delano Grape Strike. Their first success was in 1965 at the beginning of the strike. Chavez sent 3 individuals to follow a grape shipment to their end destination at an Oakland dock. Once there, the individuals successfully persuaded the longshoremen not to load the grapes onto the boats. This resulted in the rotting of 1,000 10-ton crates of grapes. Chavez then organized a boycott against 2 of the largest grape-growing companies, Schenley Industries and the DeGorgio Corporation. The boycott was also successful, and profits of non-union grape companies dropped drastically.
I decided to quit buying grapes after reading about Cesar Chavez's boycott of non-union grapes. I would go to the grocery and see the grapes, but I wouldn't buy them. I actually didn't buy grapes for a long, long time in support of this boycott.
In March 1966, Chavez led a march to protest Schenley Industries after it was said that they sprayed striking workers with agricultural poisons. The march was from Delano, California, and stretched 300 miles to Sacramento, the state capital of California. After seeing how much attention Chavez's march was receiving, the companies responded with violence, but Cesar Chavez advocated nonviolence. Chavez also fasted 3 separate times and later was supported by Senator Robert Kennedy. Kennedy's support gained attention for the cause while he supported it and said this in an interview. He's been on a hunger strike and is committed to nonviolence, and I think that that's terribly important. After continued protest and pressure, Schenley and DeGorgio were forced to sign contracts with NFWA. In September 1966, 2 major farmworkers' unions merged to form the United Farm Workers, or UFW. The union provided food, money, and equipment to support the workers' strike. By 1970, UFW had significantly improved conditions for grape pickers in Delano. One of the reasons the Delano grape strike was so successful was because of Chavez's use of nonviolence. This tactic led all parties associated in the strike to sit down together and compromise because the workers refused to fight back against the owners using force. After the success of the Delano grape strike, continuous boycotts had dropped grape companies' sales drastically. In order to gain sales again, all California table grape growers were forced to sign labor contracts in 1970. The contracts granted better wages and protections for workers, as well as granted basic amenities in the field such as bathrooms and clean water. Companies also could not replace striking workers, and they weren't allowed to use pesticides, which had been known to cause severe skin disorders. His quote, "There is no such defeat in nonviolence," rings true in the case of the Delano grape strike. Chavez used many forms of nonviolence such as marches, fasting, boycotts, protests, and even once purposely got arrested in order to gain attention for the strike. The success with the Delano grape strike raised awareness for the migrant workers' cause. Organizations were formed to help continue Chavez's legacy and continue to protect migrant workers. For example, the Farm Labor Organizing Committee, or FLOC, was started in Northwest Ohio to protect the rights of migrant workers in the Midwestern United States, including North Carolina. The strike improved conditions for over 50,000 workers and paved the way for them.